orientation is in A&P courses, we always look at the human body and look at how it's oriented, its position to everything else. So that is normally the first thing. At the same time, that's when we start defining what anatomy is and what physiology is. So basically, anatomy is the study of the body parts and their relationship to each other. In that sense, if we look at large structures which are easily observable, that's gross anatomy. If we look at very fine structures, we use microscopes in the lab. That's microscopic anatomy. And in all that, we are looking at the structure of the body parts. Also, you might talk about cytology. When we look at studies of cells using microscopes, that's cytology. Similarly, we can talk about the histology, which is microscopic study of tissue. That is not history, histology, as you can see. And then we could talk about embryology, which is the study of the development of the embryo. These are all studies we can refer to in anatomy. But the main thing is, here we are looking at the structure of the body parts. Now, your course is A&P. So obviously, the second part is physiology. When we look at how those body parts function, but more importantly, how they complement each other. This is vital. Complementarity of structure and function. Whatever you have, whatever I have, structures, you will find our body structures are there related to the function. If you think of anything, you will find every body part we have is related to the function. Here is a good example of air sacs. Where do you find the air sacs in your body? Lungs? Where in the lungs? What's in the alveoli? Are you just reading my notes? No. What's in alveoli? I know you're right. What's in alveolus? What alveoli? Essex. Alveolus, the singular form of the same thing. Thank you. So if you look at all air sacs, you will find that the very thin walls, why the thin walls is to facilitate exchange of gases, which normally would be oxygen and what? Carbon dioxide. Do you understand the exchange of gases? The question is, why do we breathe? Why do you breathe? Really? Do you think there's all this is oxygen? So why do we breathe? All right, yes, you have a guess? What is respiration? Okay, Okay, you're getting there, and then what? Right. What we breathe is for us eventually to get energy from that. That's why we breathe. Why do we eat? Is for us to get energy from the what? From the food. You can think of anything else because the story is when you breathe, when I breathe, the air we breathe has more oxygen that goes into the lungs, exchange in the lungs so that the oxygen goes where? This exchange of gases. Where does the oxygen go? Into? Right. The oxygen is absorbed into the blood. Then from the blood, what happens? Where does this oxygen go? Where? To your brain? No, this is simple biology. Where does that oxygen go? It goes to the individual cells of the body. That oxygen goes to the cells. In the cells, what happens? You should know that. In the cells, what happens? It means the oxygen is then used up in a process called cellular respiration. Which part of the cell does that? The mitochondria. What is the result of cellular respiration? Energy. You get the story. When you breathe, that's what happens. Similarly, when you eat, it's the same story. That food eventually goes where? Yeah, but after that, where is the end? Where does it go? To the cells. Again, the cells, so that the cells can extract what? Energy. That's why we eat. Now, that's biology. So obviously, why I stopped right there is just to make sure whatever we study, there is always a relationship between what? Structure and what? Function. Everything, the cells, the tissues, everything, there's always complementarity of structure and function. So remember, now, in terms of structural organization in the human body, you could say with these structures or levels of organization, from the atoms, cells, tissues, organs, organ systems, and the organism. If you look at that list, this list is listing these structures in what are we using there? Based on what? Just look at that. From the atoms, cells, tissues, organs, organ system, organism. What are we basing this? Based on what? Not cells. Size. It's based on size. This is the largest, and this will be the what? Smallest. So it's actually in size, from the smallest to the largest. In this form, we are including both non-living as well as living. The smallest living structure in the body starts where? Cells. It's not the atoms. But in terms of size in general, atoms, then cells, which is the basic unit of life, tissues, organs, organ system, organismal is the whole body. That would be the last. So remember that. Of course, we know even within the atoms, you can go slightly further, the subatomic particles, right? You know those. Atoms are made up of subatomic particles. Which are those? Protons, electrons, and neutrons. That's right. And we will be talking about that next week. Actually, starting this week. So again, if you forgot your chemistry, please go and brush it up. It will be needed in this course. Here we are just talking about smallest right up to the largest, and all that is based on size. So remember, the basic unit of life is the cell. The atom really is a non-living particle. The organ systems you will find in this course, all those that are listed in green are going to be studied in this course in detail later. Integumentary system, NP1. That means your skin, all the exterior parts, all the cutaneous membranes, all are involved in the integumentary system. We are going to look at that in detail. So in the meantime, just make sure you are well aware what this generally means, integumentary system. Then we're going to look at the skeletal system. Again, skeletal system, bones, joints, and some of those cartilages involved here. Why do we have the skeleton? Yeah, it's a simple question. There is a lot more we get from the skeleton than what you probably know. So bear in mind, we will talk about the skeletal system in detail later in this course. Also, muscular system, NP1. That is what allows the manipulation of the environment. We normally ask you, what system manipulates the environment? In other words, what changes the environment? It is the muscular system. And we will look at the muscular system in detail in this course. That's, again, another system. In other words, we're going to be learning about all the muscles you have in the body. And there are a number of muscles in the body. There are well over 600 muscles in your body, my body. We'll learn about those muscles in their name. Bear that in mind. Then we'll look at the organ system, the nervous system. We'll look at this in real detail. If you look at the syllabus, you will find that chapters 12, 13, and 14 is all the nervous system. And we end with chapter 14. So this course is from chapter 1 to chapter 14. Then 15 is NP2. A lot we'll talk about in the nervous system, where we talk about the brain, spinal cord, and the nerves. There is a lot, we'll look at that later. Endocrine system, that's NP2. For us, we really need to know basic things about the endocrine system. What it is, what are the glands involved, because we do refer to them. Things like the ovaries, testes, pancreas, adrenal gland, thymus, thyroid, pituitary, pineal. All these are endocrine glands involved in the endocrine system. The endocrine system is there to produce hormones which all facilitate coordinate functions of the body. This morning we are going to look at one of these, the pituitary gland, later on, so bear that in mind. Otherwise, you don't have to look at this in detail because that's NP1, 2. But at least you need to know the basics of the endocrine glands. Cardiovascular, again, NP2, but we need to know, of course, some of them, the heart, the vascular tissues, the arteries, the veins, and so on. Lymphatic and immune system, NP2, but for us, we need to know a few basic things because we might refer to that. We normally talk about the lymphatic and immune as two systems. Lymphatic involves these kind of liquids that are taken part as this cardiovascular. Immune system is for protection, production of what? What would be important in the immune system? Production of antibodies. Remember during COVID, the whole idea of being vaccinated was to promote antibodies for the immune system. So we'll look at that in your ANP2. Respiratory system is what we mentioned earlier on, involving the lungs, trachea, nasal. The whole thing is why this system is there is to supply each individual cell with the necessary what? Oxygen. So that eventually we produce what? Energy. In mitochondria. Cells, we'll look at that in detail, of course, in this course. Digestive system, well, if there is anything the US is known for, it's food. That's why this nation is known for having 24 hours restaurants. 3 a.m. people are having breakfast. 1 a.m. people are eating 24 hours a day. It's just the way things are. Isn't that right? Every city you go here in the US, the first thing you see is some kind of a restaurant somewhere. Because Americans are known for what? Food. Yeah, it might be good, it might be bad, I don't know how we look at it. But certainly, what is biologist? Where does that food go and why? That's the digestive system. Again, eventually it goes to the cells to make sure it supplies the cells with the energy it needs. Urinary system, you probably know about that. What's the urinary system? It's a system involved in what? Removal of waste, either water or solids. We know as we eat, there's going to be waste somewhere. So that system removes that urinary system. Again, that's ANP2. Male and reproductive, this is male reproductive system, which is always talked about with the female. Two systems. When you go to NP2, this is the whole system on its own for the male. Then similarly for the female. If I ask you right now, which are the major organs for the female reproductive system, what would you say? The ovary, uterus, what else? Yes, vagina, what else? All that is involved in the female reproductive system. For the males, of course, we'll talk about that. What do you know about the male? Okay, what else? Let him talk. That's what he wants. Is that okay? Plants. When you take a shower, take a look at the male reproductive. There is a lot. Okay? Similarly for the ladies. Then let's move on to this section on the language of whenever we study anatomy, it is a special science for health and like any science, there are certain terms that we as physiologists, anatomy, must learn just specifically for us. So the language of anatomy is really important because it gives us terms for position of the body, direction within the body, the regions, the structures, and of course, everything else. The key is what we call the anatomical standard body position. This is the key. In anatomy, we always talk about this body position when you stand with your feet and everything erect, feet parallel, arms hanging by the sides, arms facing forward, thumbs pointing away from the body. This type of position here is the anatomical standard body position. Let's all stand right now into that body position. Let me see you showing it. This anatomical standard body position. Let's do that right now. Let me see you do that. Anatomical standard body position. Is that correct? No? What's wrong? No? Yes. Yes. The main thing you might say, why are we restrict on that? It is the only body position when we can refer to everything else. So we will be talking about that. This anatomical body position is remember that. It's simple, yes. It has a purpose at the same time. All right. So because of that anatomical standard position, which you see this lady right now, she is actually standing but lateral, meaning we are looking at her sideways. We can now talk about the superior part of the body, inferior part of the body, ventral part of the body, posterior, superficial, and deep. Do you understand those terms? Superior, obviously, it means what? Upwards. Then inferior, downwards. Anterior or ventral means what? On the ventral side, this end here, this is posterior. Did you know that every animal on earth has a ventral and posterior part. Every animal. I don't know how many animals you know. Have you ever seen a worm, a snake? Every animal has a ventral part and a posterior. So there is a reason for that. Hopefully we can look at that. So again, posterior, inferior, superficial means outside. Superficial is near the what? The surface of the skin or the body. So it's almost right near the surface. Deep, of course, is deep inside. So whenever you mention the body positions, we use this term, which obviously you need to know right now. Then similarly, the same anatomical standard body position, we can now talk of proximal, distal. Proximal is any part that's close to the origin of the body part. Distal is away. We'll explain that. If I stretch my arm, are you looking at me? My hands are located where? Distal. They are further away from the origin. My hands originate here. My hand here is distal in as far as the arm. When I look at this part of the arm, this is what? Proximal, which means near the origin. So you look at this here, this would be proximal, this would be distal, away. If you look at your legs, right from the hip is what? Proximal. Toes, distal, away. And that's what we have. Then similarly, medial is right in the middle, lateral on the sides, and then you can talk about intermediate in between. But the proximal and distal are two terms you need to really understand, because they can be confusing. We will be talking about, if I ask you, is your hand proximal or distal to the body? Refer to this chart. Proximal, near the origin. Distal, away from the origin, like in this case. So here, distal, in terms of the leg, away, proximal, near the origin, that's where your hips are. Again, these are terms when we talk of directional terms in the body. Now, similarly, we talk about body planes or sections. These are imaginary lines that are used, imagining as if the body is cut. So we have definitely sections we talk about. The first one is what we call sagittal plane. That's when you divide the body vertically into right and left parts. So if you divide the body straight down into the right part and the left part, that's a sagittal plane. Frontal is dividing the body into anterior and what? Posterior, like we found here. If we cut this body right, the anterior and posterior, that would be our frontal plane or coronal. Then transverse is if you are dividing the body horizontally at 90 degrees. In other words, if you cut the body into this section and that section, that is transverse. And then oblique is really cutting the body at an angle. Yeah, I know it could be confusing. Let me show you the diagram to make life easier. This is what? Sagittal. As you can tell, we are dividing the body into left and right. Let me just clarify that. When you talk of the left side of the body and the right, it is not your left side. It's the left side of what you are looking at. For example, you are looking at me right now. This is my what? Right. This is my left. It's not from your perspective, but from the perspective of the object you are looking at. So don't get confused. It's always what you are looking at gives you whatever the side you are. So this is sagittal. What about that? This would be transverse. And finally, that would be what? That frontal. Frontal is in the middle, front and back. Transverse from the middle portion, and of course, sagittal is left. Are we clear on that? So again, we use that when we describe the body. You might be talking about sagittal plane, and then you know what it really looks like. That's sagittal, transverse, and that's front. Again, if you check in your textbook, it's clear. In the lab manual, it's also very clear what they talk about. Now, similarly, we talk about body cavities. Our bodies are divided into cavities, into spaces, as you might think of. So right now, you're looking at the body. Firstly, the dorsal cavity is all this cavity on the dorsal side, from the cranial cavity to the spinal. This is all dorsal cavity. Then on this side is what? Ventral cavity. Do you see that? If you look at this body, anything on the dorsal, that's dorsal cavity. Both dorsal cavity is comprised of cranial cavity and spinal cavity. On the ventral, it's comprised of thoracic cavity and, notice this, if you are including everything else here, that's abdominal pelvic cavity. If you separate these two into abdominal and pelvic, you can separate those two. So once again, our bodies is divided into cavities. Dorsal cavities and ventral. Within the dorsal, there is the cranial and what? Spinal cavity. Within the ventral, there is thoracic and what? Abdominal pelvic. But you can subdivide the abdominal pelvic into abdominal cavity and what? The thoracic still remains. You see that? So the question is, they sometimes ask you, what are the organs you find in a particular cavity? So when you look at that, that's the thing you should be. But straight away, you find the cranial cavity also the brain protected by the skull. The spinal cavity houses the what? Spinal cord. And of course, I can talk about thoracic cavity. What does it house? The lungs. What about abdominal cavity? Stomach, intestine, what about pelvic? What's involved right in the pelvic? What organs? Oh, remember those unitary organs? They are all housed within the pelvic cavity. let me put that probably. Okay. So spinal, cranial, dorsal, ventral. But obviously, make sure you can go further and see what is housed in the abdominal, housed in the pelvic, and similarly in the cranium. That's something you can quickly check. Ventral cavity, like we mentioned, we're now looking at the body, right? Head on. Thoracic cavity, abdominal pelvic cavity. Remember how I divided? Abdominal pelvic is abdominal in what? Pelvic cavity. It's called abdominal pelvic cavity. In other words, these two is abdominal pelvic cavity involving abdominal cavity, pelvic cavity, but up here, thoracic cavity. Do you see that? This diagram is the same thing as that diagram. The only difference is we're looking at the what? Lateral, and in this case, of course, right anterior. Are we okay so far on these body cavities? Are we okay? All right. Now, here is something that you also need to know. Later on in the lab, we'll be looking at that certainly. We talk about these abdominal pelvic quadrants. Remember, what was the abdominal pelvic cavity? It involved what? Abdominal cavity and what? And pelvic cavity. In other words, all this from here right up there. We can divide the abdominal pelvic cavity into what we call quadrants. What is the quadrant? Quadrant is a what? When you talk about quadrants, how many parts are you talking? Four. One part out of four. So here, the quadrants are 1, 2, 3, 4. Right upper quadrant. Notice the right. It's not your right, but the right for this particular diagram. Right upper quadrant, left upper quadrant, left lower quadrant. It was right lower quadrant. That's very easy. Dividing the abdominal pelvic cavity into what? Four sections. Again, the main thing here is we might ask you what is normally found in the left upper quadrant? What's found in the right upper quadrant? So when you look at this diagram, notice some of the organs in the quadrants. That's the simpler part, these quadrants. At the same time, we sometimes talk of regions. So we divide those abdominal pelvic cavity into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 regions. And by the end of this lecture, you must know those 9. Well, probably not. At the end of lab next week, you need to know that. So the 9 quadrants, the 9 regions, right hypochondriatic region, this part. Epigastric region, that part. Left hypochondriatic, that part. And you can go down into. Again, once you know the regions, what will be the next thing you have to learn? The different organs under those regions. Well, I don't see anything there. Yes, you don't see anything on that diagram. How would you find the regions, the organs? What do? You're looking at that. If I ask you, what is normally the organs located here? What would you say? Yeah, there are no organs. We don't see anything there. Where would you go and find out? Well, just go online. Type in right hypochondriatic region and it will tell you the organs. Again, it's not always the case you think, see right here, you can say, well, what's in here? Yes, you might know, but if you want to know a lot more, type umbilical region online and they'll list all the organs there. So it's not just enough to say, yeah, I looked at that, I now know the nine. You need to know also the organs in each of those regions. To be clear on this. Now, you might say, well, when you go and check this, it's as easy as everything. All I'm saying is, learning does not just stop right here. You go home, online, check some of these things. You get a lot more information. Are we clear on the quadrants and regions? Quadrants, regions, by the end of the lab next week, hopefully you know all those regions. More importantly, the organs behind those regions. Okay? All right. Homeostasis. What is that? If I say write a sentence or two on homeostasis, what would you? What is homeostasis? You know? Okay, partly yes. Have you ever seen this word anywhere? So what is it? Homeostasis. Okay, I just wanted the basic. What's homeostasis? What do you understand by that? Every animal on earth strives to maintain it. And what is the idea? The ability of organisms to maintain a what? Stable environment. In other words, everything we do, we're all aiming to establish this homeostasis. In other words, right now it's a cold morning. Immediately when you went outside because it's cold, what did your body do? Without you doing anything, it started to what? To shiver. Why? To generate what? Heat. To make up for the heat because it's a cold environment. If you move into a hot area, what does your body do? You sweat. Why do we sweat? What is the relationship between sweating and cooling? Yeah, you said when we sweat, it cools our bodies. Why? Here, three answers. What do you think? Okay, but I want the process of sweating. Yeah, I know the cooling. Why do you feel cooler when you sweat? It's not quite the scientific explanation. Why do you feel cooler when you sweat? It's all to do with what? With the environment. Okay, a little bit more on that. Yes. Evaporation. Right, now we're getting there. Tell us more. But you're right. What is the relationship? All right, let me quickly explain. Whenever you have a liquid, you know, every matter exists in three forms: solid, liquid, and what? Gas. Whenever there is change of form, it's either you add heat or you remove the heat. From solid ice, if you want to melt that ice, what do? You add what? Oh, oh, okay, I know we salt it, but you add heat to melt ice. Right? If you have water and you want it to turn into ice, what do? It's simply what you do. You remove the what? The heat. What does your refrigerator do? It removes the heat from the solids. That's why it freezes. You understand that? So in this case, there is water on your skin. And when that water, which is sweat, evaporates, for the water to evaporate, it needs what? It needs heat. Where does that heat come from? From your body. That's why you feel cool. It's because water is evaporating, and to evaporate, it will take heat from the skin and you feel cooler. You get the difference now? So when you go to your refrigerator, what it is doing, it's removing heat from the foods. Turn off the refrigerator and the heat goes back, everything melts. So the idea of evaporation is the idea that when you turn water, which is liquid, into gaseous form, you need to add what? Heat. And it turns into water. You get the idea now? So sweating, you make your body cool. The signs is when that water is evaporating, it takes heat from the body. You get the idea now? Okay. So obviously, in this homeostasis, it's controlled by the nervous system as well as the what? Endocrine. Do you remember endocrine system? Remember the endocrine system? We say the endocrine system is comprised of what type of glands? The endocrine glands. Do you remember? Do you remember some of the glands that are listed there? Which were the glands we talked about? We didn't talk much. Pituitary, yes. Renal gland, yes. Thyroid, yes. Thymus. What else? Pineal, yes. What else? The simpler one for the ladies, the ovary. And the other ones for the, those are also endocrine what? Glands. Yes, they are involved in so many things, but they're also involved here. So to maintain homeostasis, these two systems are used. How are they used? Well, three things. First, you need a receptor to get the information. Then you need the control center to interpret the information. Then lastly, what do you need? Effector to carry out the effect. That is how homeostasis works. What are the receptors? These are all what we use to receive the stimuli from the environment. The skin, the eyes, anything we perceive the environment are receptors. And when that information is received, where is it sent? To the brain, yes, nervous system. And what does the nervous system do? It interprets. Right now you are looking at me. Your eyes are sending images to the brain. The brain says, yeah, that image you are looking at is so and so. The brain. Similarly, effector is how we respond. So every time there's homeostasis, three things are involved: the receptor, the control, and the effector. This is what controls those components. In the same way, whenever you're talking about the negative feedback, how the homeostatic control works. How many of you know if I mention the word thermostat? Do you know what a thermostat is in your home? What is a thermostat? Can be difficult. Control the temperature in the room. Right. If you want the temperature to be cooler, you just go on the thermostat and lower the thermostat, right? So what it does, it maintains the temperature in the room what? Constant. That's a thermostat. It works on the basis of what we call negative feedback, which means it shuts off the stimulus when it reduces or reaches a certain temperature. If, the, if you want to cool the room, if the room becomes warmer, it turns on. And once it's actually above a certain temperature, it cuts off. That is the thermostat. It regulates. In this case, we have the body temperature in the body, regulation of what? Body temperature. Did you know that? Did you know that our bodies always regulate the temperature to a constant temperature? Did you know that? What's your normal body temperature? What is that? You know what we're talking about. What's your normal body temperature? Normal body temperature? Okay. Here is the thing. In science, we don't understand the word Fahrenheit. As soon as you walk into the lab, forget Fahrenheit. It's all metric. When you said Fahrenheit, I purposely said what? I don't understand that. Yes, I do when I walk outside this room. What? The normal body temperature. What? Okay, it's about 36.9, 37 columns. In Fahrenheit, 98 point something. Here is the thing. In science, forget about what? Fahrenheit. It's all metric. That's why I couldn't understand what you're talking about. All right. That's a regulation of body temperature. If our bodies, they always want to regulate the body temperature to a constant. Now you can actually go outside there without wearing anything. Boy, yes, you feel cold, but the body is going to work so hard to make you feel what? Warm to that 36.9. That's a regulation of body temperature. That's what we call a negative one, feedback, because it uses a thermostat. The other side is what we call a positive feedback. Positive feedback is whenever the influence, it increases the effects, which means the response enhances the original stimulus. Now, the example I'm going to use here is better understood by women that have given birth. During childbirth, when the child is about to come out, those contractions in the what? Uterus are caused by oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone produced by the hypothalamus, but kept in the pineal gland. Do you remember pineal gland? What do you remember pineal gland? Pineal gland, do you remember that? It was one of the what? Endocrine glands. It stores oxytocin. Oxytocin is a hormone that enhances, it facilitates labor contractions during childbirth. The process is more of oxytocin is injected. It's not like the negative. This is more and more until the result is achieved. That's positive feedback. Similarly, even in blood clotting, it's a positive feedback because your blood will clot when there's more and more proteins added to the blood for it to what? To clot. So the difference in these two is shown by this here. This is a simple thing, negative feedback. Stimulus, the heat, receptors, the skin, control center, the brain, the effect, sweating. Once you sweat, you cool the body so that the body remains constant. If you cool it cold, the receptors, the skin, control center, the brain, the effectors, muscles, you shiver, remain warm so that the balance of your temperature remains constant. Negative feedback. In as far as positive feedback here, it's labor contractions of the uterus. Here is the uterus, that's the cervix, these are ovaries, that's fallopian tube, that's the vagina. So the child is sitting right in here, in the uterus. So the oxytocin makes the uterus contract. That contraction forces the child out. Until the child comes out, the contraction will continue to grow what? Bigger and bigger until the child what? Comes out. That's a positive feedback. Childbirth, whereas temperature control here, this is a negative what? Feedback. This is like a thermostat. Whereas here, the action carries on until the end result. Clear on that? All right, so that brings us to the end. So what will